What is the proof that Jesus was who he says he is in the gospel?
A really interesting conversation here between Dr. William Lane Craig, famous Christian apologist, and Ben Shapiro, even more famous Jewish political commentator. Ben Shapiro asks Dr. Craig, how do we know that Jesus is who he says he is? If I'm going to believe he's God, I better have some pretty good evidence. Why would I believe he is the Messiah? And Dr. William Lane Craig is going to go on to outline, first of all, what does Jesus say about himself? And the conversation leads us somewhere pretty interesting. Check it out.
Well, first we need to establish who he thought he was. When you look at the religio-historical context of the life and ministry of Jesus, I think you can show that among the historically authentic words of Jesus were claims that he thought he was the Jewish Messiah, that he believed himself to be the Son of God in a unique sense that set him apart from Jewish kings and prophets. And finally, that he thought that he was the Son of Man predicted by the prophet Daniel, to whom God would give all dominion, power, and authority. So he had this radical self-understanding of being Messiah, Son of God, and the Son of Man. And at the trial scene before the Sanhedrin in Mark 15, all three of these titles come to a head when the high priest asks him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One, that is the Son of God?" And Jesus says, "I am." And then virtually quoting from Daniel, "And you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and seated at the right hand of the power." And at that point, the high priest rips his robes and says, "You have heard the blasphemy. What more witnesses do we need?" And Mark says they all condemned him as worthy of death. And that enabled them, since they didn't have the ability to carry out capital punishment, to deliver him over to the Roman authorities by slandering him as a pretender to be king of the Jews, and therefore a political figure who could be tried for treason and sedition and crucified.
The reason Dr. William Lane Craig is laying out this foundation is because a lot of our Islamic friends, for example, will say Jesus was great, he was wise, but he wasn't God and he never claimed to be. It's actually only a false, distorted gospel that leads us to believe that Jesus claimed to be God or even accepted worship. But Islam isn't the only one. A lot of other religions, dare I say, people across the world just look at Jesus and take a lot of his lessons from Sermon on the Mount and say, well, this is great. I'm not going to worship Jesus as God, but Jesus seems to be onto something here. He seems to be really wise. He seems to be a great teacher. And like any other great teacher, we can just accept his teachings without believing that he's God. But what we really need to figure out is, does Jesus leave us with the option of saying, you're a good man, you're wise, but you're not God? C.S. Lewis is incredibly clear about this. Jesus is either a lunatic, a liar, or Lord. Jesus really doesn't give us the ability to honestly interpret the Bible and take away from it that he's a nice teacher, but he's not God. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but through him. Not, I know a way, I know the truth, and I can give you some life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You do not come to God but through me. It's sentiments like these that led the high priest to tear his robe and send Jesus to the Romans to eventually get scourged and crucified. This is why it was so important that Jesus made very clear, I am God. I am to be worshipped. I and the Father are one. The apostles and first century Christians were not confused about this. They did not mince their words. They were incredibly clear that Jesus Christ is God. Now, the question is, do we have enough evidence that what he said is true? Is he God? Well, what would you need to see to believe that he's God? Let's take a look at something called the minimal facts approach. Let's only grant historical facts that even Jesus's biggest skeptics will grant. Let's not grant good evidence. Let's only grant historical fact and then see what options we're left with. Number one, Jesus died by crucifixion. It is incredibly well documented by Christians and people who weren't Christians. Number two, the empty tomb. Number three, post-resurrection sightings. People at the very least believe they saw and came across Jesus after the crucifixion, not just the disciples. Number four, the origin of the church, the lives of the apostles, the lives of people who saw Jesus. They lived nomadic lives, getting beaten, getting tortured, getting ran out of town, getting arrested, getting publicly humiliated, and eventually killed for this belief. Just granting these 4 historical facts that we know, that even Bart Ehrman would grant, please tell me something that's more likely than the resurrection. And if you tell me it doesn't matter, it can be anything, then you're not making historical claims, you're making philosophical claims that resurrections are impossible, that there is no such thing as a supernatural. In which case, I would urge you not to let your bad philosophy destroy good history. Hallucinations make way less sense. Why would we all have the same hallucination? And also, why would Paul and the brother of Jesus, James, who were both basically happy Jesus was dead, why would they have grief hallucinations about him? There's no evidence whatsoever that the body was stolen. I mean, you can take a shot in the dark and just make random stuff up, but you have no evidence for anything that you would make up. So when you look at the evidence for Jesus Christ, really, if he did resurrect, it's game, set, match for Christianity, as Dr. Michael Ikonis says. If Jesus claims to be God, tells you he's going to die, but he's going to resurrect, and then dies, and then is resurrected, what else do you need to see to believe that he's God? Ask yourself this. Is it the lack of evidence stopping you from giving your life to Jesus? Or is it that you just don't want to? You don't want to give up the life that you're living? Maybe this is a more helpful question. What evidence would you need? And then if you come up with a bunch of stuff, really ask yourself, is that reasonable? Don't you believe in other things that have less evidence for them? I pray that Ben Shapiro and others would look at the evidence and go, you know what, Jesus Christ is Lord, I should give myself over to him. But truthfully, I think there's something else in the way, and there's another reason why people don't give their lives to Jesus Christ, because we've had enough evidence. Whatever you don't want to give up, whether it's a particular sin or a particular lifestyle, I urge you not to lose your soul over that one thing. I know it's hard. I have faith crises all the time, because believing what is undeniably true, but kind of not particularly well seen, yeah, that's really difficult. I can't see God. I can't hear an audible voice. So I do have to hold on to my faith. Don't think that because it's difficult, then you shouldn't believe in him. Thanks so much for watching. We'll speak soon.